Welcome, welcome, welcome. Part of our continuing discussion where we talk to scholars, columnists, reporters, writers, activists, philosophers, professors, etc. Anybody on the left, anybody on the right, anybody who can think intelligently. And we provide the information directly to you, the public, so that you can do this thing that used to be popular when I was in high school called thinking for yourself. Not popular these days, but we're trying to bring it back. Maybe there'll be a renaissance. With us today is Patrick Grimm. He's a distinguished teaching professor of philosophy at Stony Brook University. He's also the philosopher in residence in complex systems at the University of Michigan. He graduated with the highest honors in anthropology and philosophy from the University of California, Santa Cruz. He was named a Fulbright Fellow to the University of St. Andrews, Scotland, from which he earned his B in philosophy. I'm not sure.
BPhil. Yes.
BPhil. Okay. He earned his PhD from Boston University. Professor Grimm is the recipient of several honors and awards. In addition to being named SUNY Distinguished Teaching Professor, Dr. Grimm has been awarded the President and Chancellor's Awards for Excellence in Teaching and was elected to the Academy of Teachers and Scholars. The Weinberg Distinguished Visiting Professor at the University of Michigan in 2006. Professor Grimm has also held visiting fellowships at the Center for Complex Systems at Michigan and the Center for Philosophy of Science at the University of Pittsburgh. Professor Grimm, author of The Incomplete Universe, Totality, Knowledge, and Truth, and co-author of The Philosophical Computer, Exploratory Essays in Philosophical Computer Modeling, and editor of the forthcoming Mind and Consciousness 5 Questions. He's the founder and co-editor of 25 volumes of The Philosopher's Annual, an anthology, the best published in philosophy each year. The classic picture of a philosopher is an individual working alone with a quill and paper. Formal philosophers may take the form of theorems. Grimm violates that picture in 2 respects. He is known as an innovator in computational philosophy, working extensively with computer modeling, and his work has often been conducted using a research team, starting with work leading to the philosophical computer. Grimm, Paul St. Denis, and Gary Marr used results from chaos theory and fractal geometry as an inspiration for modeling self-reference in infinite-valued logics and embodied game theory with cellular automata to obtain results regarding the evolution of cooperation and the computational universality and formal undecidability of the spatialized prisoner's dilemma. I'm not going to say that again. Today, we're going to be talking with him about this article, Rational, Social, and Political Polarization, written in 2018. Roughly what it's about is public discussions of political and social issues are often characterized by deep and persistent polarization. In social psychology, it's standard to treat belief polarization as the product of epistemic irrationality. In contrast, we argue that the persistent disagreement that grounds political and social polarization can be produced by epistemically rational agents when those agents have limited cognitive resources. Using an agent-based model of group deliberation, we show that groups of deliberating agents using coherence-based strategies for managing their limited resources tend to polarize into different subgroups. We argue that using that strategy is epistemically rational for limited agents. So even though group polarization looks like it must be the product of human irrationality, polarization can be the result of fully rational deliberations with natural human limitations. I think what you're saying is people get limited news. They have limited information and they make decisions based upon that. But let's get to it. Professor, did I get anything wrong? Is there anything with the bio we need to change or correct?
No, some of it's slightly out of date, but it doesn't matter. It's okay. The core of it, and the core of this article is, yes, I tend to work with research groups, as I did on this one, and it's a form of computational modeling, trying to understand formation of polarization.
I think what you're saying in this study, rational, social, and political polarization. In contrast, we argue that the persistent disagreement that grounds political and social polarization can be produced by epistemically rational agents when those agents have limited cognitive resources. So rational people who only watch Fox News can still be overly influenced by Fox News. Is that
no? It's actually worse than that.
Okay.
It's not merely that, rational people with different sources of information, or even rational people who choose different media to pay attention to will polarize. No, this is actually a little deeper than that, a little simpler and a little deeper.
Okay.
In social psychology, it's standard to treat polarization as in some way epistemically irrational, and even deciding to listen to Fox News exclusively or the other side exclusively could be seen as irrational. Now, what we try to do is use an agent-based model and indicate that no, even if you have people who are in total discussion with everybody, even if they're drawing from the same pool of reasons to form their beliefs, that because of certain simple facts about information management, polarization can result. So nobody's being irrational. They're always forming their beliefs in terms of their available evidence. Nobody is exclusively paying to one batch of evidence rather than another. Everybody's talking to everybody. And yet, with certain assumptions, which seem to be fairly rational assumptions, rational people can diverge in ways that look like polarization. Do you want me to tell you more about this?
So I think but let me try to just break down for the audience. So even if you have people who are in total discussion with everybody and are drawing from the same pool of reasons to make their beliefs as everybody else, because of simple ways the human brain works, the simple ways that we can just make the world make sense, simple facts about information management, the way our brain has to deal with, there's so much data, how do we make the world make sense? It's actually kind of rational and not insane that people polarize. Instead of viewing everybody who's polarizing as crazy, we should view it as, well, maybe the behavior is crazy, but the reason they go to it and behave that way is quite rational itself and makes sense given the deliberations they have to deal with.
Yeah, that's very well put. And when people are polarized, they may well tend to think, oh, the other side is merely being irrational. And what this study seems to indicate is that's not necessarily true. Not that people aren't sometimes irrational, but that there can be mechanisms that produce polarization that aren't irrational in that way.
So
do you want to know why? Do you want to know more?
Yeah, but please remember, this is for a general audience, not computational science, not. So I like taking the academic stuff, and I don't want to dumb it down, as Einstein said, make it as simple as possible, but no simpler. Simpler being not a word, meaning dumb it down.
All right.
How does this work? How does this? Why is it for someone who's maybe 15 years old? Why is this if you were explaining it to your young nephew or niece who's coming into high school and they're starting to take government, why is it rational to think Donald Trump's a good man, Uncle?
Well, all I can talk about is how it can get there.
Okay. Why is it rational people get there, Uncle? How does that happen?
Okay. I'm going to make a contrast between where polarization doesn't happen and where it can in the agent-based model that we constructed. So you've got a couple of graphs there, a couple of sets of graphs. Will you give us
yes, sir.
Those? Okay, that's not the one I want to talk about. No, that's the one just before that's the one I want to talk about. This is a picture of it's a histogram, which means that the beliefs are sort of on the bottom. And you can think of this as left and right, politically, left and right, okay? Or yes or no, guilty or innocent on some kind of verdict. But the scale on the bottom is, this is sort of where people's beliefs lie along this spectrum. And it's to the right of 0 is, you're on the conservative side. To the left of 0 is you may be on the liberal side. And the little numbers are how strong you are on that way. Okay. Now, traditionally, when modeling started out, the attempt to model how beliefs form, you always got a pattern like this. It's convergence. And everybody ends up agreeing basically in the middle. This is sort of step by step that you're going through here, or it may be at an extreme, but everybody agrees on the same thing. Well, if you have a population of people, if you have 100 people, say, if they're discussing by drawing reasons from their background, but everybody talks to everybody. So on every round, they put out one of their reasons for the view that they hold, or just for a view. Now, if all the reasons we're talking about is all the evidence that's available, and if we had infinite memories so that we just soaked up all the information available, we would come to consensus. All our evidence would be the same. All the weights of that evidence would be the same. If we didn't disagree about any of that, we'd all see the total truth and we'd all agree on it.
Perfect kumbaya world.
Yeah, that's right. Now, people don't have infinite memories. And that's what our study is about, is, well, what if they only have headroom for a small number of things? Okay. Now, it turns out that if they have limited headroom, but still they just forget things at random, it still turns out that you'll get a convergence pattern. In fact, if you have limited headroom, but everybody just drops the weakest reason they've heard, you'll still get convergence. When you don't get convergence, and now if you'll give me the second graph, this looks more like polarization, stepwise, step 0, step 10, step 20. And what's happening here is, when I hear a new reason, I've got limited headroom. Given the total evidence I've seen, meaning everything that I remember plus this new piece of evidence, what piece of evidence should I informationally manage eliminate? Well, if the total evidence indicates, oh, the guy's guilty, I'll drop the weakest reason for what I think is the mistaken view that he's innocent. Or if my total evidence indicates the death penalty is a bad idea, then what reason my information management will tell me to drop just the weakest reason that says it's a good idea. And what we found is, just starting with a population that are drawing reasons like that, communicating them to everybody, but judging their own information management in terms of what they think the truth is, given everything they've seen, you get this polarization pattern. So nobody's being irrational, and yet because we don't have infinite memories, because we can't manage everything, we go, well, I'm just going to continue to believe what I have the best reason to believe is the truth. And I'm not going to drop just the total other side. I'll just drop the weakest things that made me think otherwise. And that's enough to produce this kind of polarization.
I remember in 2008, we had the global economic collapse caused by speculation in the stock market and housing, and where they packaged derivatives and sell it to somebody they didn't know what they were doing. And so you had a lot of social scientists get involved the following 2 years, 2008 to 2010, explaining to the public, how did this happen? How did all these people who study money and economics and stuff, how did they get it all so wrong? Because they were losing money. And you had some psychologists finally come out with a very scary, frightening concept. And what they said was, we assume that these stock market traders and bankers and everybody are these super geniuses. Maybe they are, but they're also human. And they will come to biases. And when they think the price is going up for lumber, because everything I see is showing that. And then there's one fact, this guy in Singapore is saying the price of lumber is going to go way down because some new beetle. That's one dude saying that, and everything else I have, and all my buddies are saying lumber's going up. So I'm just going to ignore this data point that doesn't fit. And I'm going to go with my general conclusion because all the rest of the data points that. And also it's kind of confusing for my mind to have to figure out how we do this. So what they found was these stock market analysts would get all this data, and they would have analysis paralysis, and they would just go, and these are people with the best minds and the best mathematics degrees and the most training in computation and mathematics. I'm not the best of everything we have as humans. And at some point they would go, all these numbers, I feel it's this. And it came down to feeling. It came down to feeling that our entire economy that we thought was run by these rational professionals who only look at numbers and digits, like on the matrix, and see it. No, there's so much information that when it gets complicated, they just go off their gut. And that seems to back up some of what you're saying here. People get a lot of information. I don't know what to do with that information. I'll go with this. I also see this a lot in anthropology. They found some new bone that doesn't fit with our understanding of the apes' convergence from humans.
Yes.
Let's ignore that. I doubt it was a real bone.
Yes.
Now our theory's intact. So we have seen what you're talking about in many realms of human behavior. Is that fair?
I think that's very fair. Okay. And some of the embarrassments, some of the academic embarrassments are right too. 2008, by the economists I know, was sort of considered a watershed. It was like, oh, if you're so smart, how can you be so wrong? Or, you know, if you're so on top of it, how can you have failed to see this coming? It's also true both in political science and in the modeling we're talking about, where that earlier graph where everybody converges on the same attitude, when you have simple modeling, you do tend to get convergence. And in fact, that was sort of a core of political science a few decades ago, to think that, oh, well, that's why the political parties have so little difference between them. That's why you've got, because you're converging on this sort of middle view. Well, we've seen a whole lot different opinion dynamics since then. So those models aren't right. In fact, one of the difficulties in this kind of modeling is, can you produce polarization? It's easy to produce consensus in this kind of formal modeling. What's interesting is, oh, well, if reality differs from a simple consensus model, there's something in reality that we haven't captured in the model. And from then on, it's what could it be?
Right.
It's very possible it could be lots of things that we haven't captured, because these are very simple models. And our work in this is to say, well, here's at least one of the things that might be responsible for polarization. It's this simple, rational information management, dealing with the fact that I don't have an infinite memory, or I don't have the capacity to handle information. That too can produce polarization.
My mom is one of the smartest women I know. She's one of the few Latinas and women that works at Fortune 500 companies. And she was a chief data officer for a couple of Fortune 500 companies, handling massive amounts of programming and data. One of the highest ranking Latinas in America. But she would get home and there would be dirty dishes and a pile of clothes on the floor. And she had a long day. And she would do this. Matt, Mark, Spanky, Matt, Mark, Spanky. Spanky's the dog. And her brain was just, I don't have time for this. I had a full day at work. Someone's made 2 messes. I'm not going to think, is this a mess caused by a human or a dog? There's 3 people who could possibly do it. I'll just start yelling out their names till one of them responds. And then the one who goes, oh, I'm sorry, go, gotcha. Okay, now, and I realized that brilliant people can just reach the end of their day where they're like, I'm not up for any more complex decision-making or analysis.
Yes.
Why don't the person who did it come forward for spanking and make my life a little bit easier? I didn't get spanked, but you get the idea. This is everywhere. This is everywhere. It would make sense. I'm surprised why we don't. I get the title of the study, Rational Social and Political Polarization. It makes sense. Why is this conclusion that you have reached so counterintuitive? We assume you're polarized, you're crazy, and yet all of us have had days where it was just too much, and I needed to just, like a parent gets, how many parents have you seen get home from a full workday and their kids like, well, why do I have to do this and do that? Because I said, right? And they have reasons. They're just, I've had a full day. Go to your room and clean it up because I'm bigger than you, right? I don't want to. We do this. We all do this. We all see this. Why is this such a strange conclusion? Why did all of us basically assume, no, if you're polarized, you must be crazy, when actually we do a lot of this on our own, and we don't consider ourselves crazy for doing it?
I think part of it is looking at polarization as if it were a static thing rather than a dynamic thing. I mean, polarization can be a noun. The society is polarized, or a one-time snapshot. I can show you I can show you where the histogram of opinions lays out, and you go, oh, that's polarized. The polarization is also sort of a verb. It's something that happens. It becomes polarized. Things happen over time. And it's because we tend to work in terms of the snapshot and reject the other side as, oh, they're just idiots, rather than considering the dynamics of opinion formation. The other reason I think that this tends to be overlooked is that it's really so simple in terms of information management. And there are other things that may well be part of the pattern of political and social polarization. We're not saying this is the only thing that happens. They may, in fact, go together. So there are theories of biased evaluation, which are backed up with very nice a long tradition of social psychological research. And it basically means that if you start with a particular view, and this is not totally disassociated from this, you're going to filter information in terms of that.
Right.
If I'm convinced of this, then it must be that the evidence indicating the opposite is misleading in some way. And a really extreme form of that is conspiracy theories, where if I'm convinced that that it was the Easter Bunny that shot Kennedy, then any information that tells me the opposite must be false. In fact, it must be a big conspiracy to give me fraudulent evidence.
So when I'm a liberal, but I always say I have two eyeballs and they work. That's got me a lot of conservative friends, but I am a liberal. And I'll talk to them and they'll say, they'll be talking about Trump's bad and Trump's bad. Oh yeah, Trump's bad. He's a bad guy. And I go, yeah, I agree. He's a bad guy. But didn't the Durham report come out and basically say Hillary Clinton used the FBI to lie about it, and they used the security apparatus to illegally go after him, and that was proven in a federal court of law? I didn't hear about that. Where'd you hear about that? Fox News? I don't need to listen to it now. It goes against what I think about Trump. So I can just say that your source comes from an untrustworthy source. Now I dismissed it. Now my worldview makes sense again. Right. See, you brought me something that might confuse me, and I kick it out immediately.
Right. And what our study indicates is you don't have to be doctrinaire about it. You can be. Maybe the more doctrinaire you are about it, the more genuinely irrational it is. But even if it's just, because it's not, right now my evidence indicates the guy's guilty, so I will pay no attention to anything that indicates that he's innocent. No, it's enough if you just go, the weakest thing that indicates he's innocent, I'll just put that aside. I'll keep all the rest, but even that can be sufficient to produce this kind of radical opinion polarization. So
I've seen
and
that.
There are other things that are involved in real life polarization, social identification with different groups, where people take their, what am I? Who am I?
Right.
Well, there are things out there that can offer you an identity. And having a certain view can be something that offers you an identity. We're not denying that happens. And we're not denying that might be irrational. But there are also mechanisms that can produce the same kind of thing that work on a much more rational plane.
I don't want to get into a discussion on identity. That's a whole other topic.
Okay.
And it definitely gets into rationality, irrational. Let me ask you about, well, first, why did you write this paper in 2018? And before you answer, I want you to put on your half, just an American citizen living in America. Why was polarization an issue worth studying in 2018?
Because it was so obvious that there seemed to be, and it seemed to be so dangerous. So it was what's happening. It was one of these, what is happening? Is there a way that we can try to understand this development that, and we came up with, there are lots of seat of the pants theories. Some of them are media influence. For example, in my childhood and adolescence, if you wanted information about the world, you turned to Walter Cronkite, and it was one broadcast station, and there was one set of information. Well, now people can choose their own facts. So that seemed to be part of it. So mostly it was, this seems to be of important political and philosophical concern. Can we try to understand what's going on? And actually, when my research group started working on it, we came up with what we thought was a really interesting model of how polarization can happen. And then one of our group did a little further research and said, well, unfortunately, it's very close to a very good model that somebody else did. So we got scooped by the Rainer Hegelman and Ulrich Krauss did a wonderful model of polarization. It doesn't do what ours does, but then we got interested in different models, and even are they telling us about the same kind of phenomena called polarization? And so the 2018 is really a piece that the research group has been doing on polarization. It's about third down the line in terms of our work in the area.
So America got to a crazy level of polarization, I think 2 years after Donald Trump was elected, and you're saying, hey, this is worth looking into. It's bad. In 2018, you're going, this is bad. This is not good. Is it worse now than it was in 2018?
I think it's hard to tell. It's certainly crystallized. There's a lot of polarization that it looks like, you're not going to wipe it out with new information. You're not going to wipe it out simply and easily. There's some of it that's going to be crystallized. Trump supporters, the core Trump supporters, seem to be willing to support him no matter what. So there's some polarization. Once it's there, that's another thing that's interesting to study in the dynamics, is if you're studying how polarization forms and how you get rid of it, once it's formed, even in the formal models, the computational models, it's very difficult to get rid of.
Even in the computational models, it's difficult to get rid of.
Yes.
Okay.
On the other hand, what we are talking about is really political polarization.
Yeah.
And most of the political science studies that really do show radical polarization are in terms of the congressional record. So my impression is it was about 1970 that you started to get increasing polarization, measured by things like, how often do Republicans vote for bills that are put up by Democrats, and vice versa? How many bills are co-sponsored by members of both parties? And what percentage of bills do Republicans, what percentage of bills put up by Republicans do Republicans vote for as opposed to Democrats? Right. And all of those indicate increased polarization. But some people will point out, yeah, but that's the sort of political elites. It doesn't show you that normal people are as polarized as their congressional representatives are, for example. So on lots of issues, it appears we've become less polarized. On general people's views on gay marriage, we've become less polarized. Racial integration is like a total non-issue. Views on the death penalty have become less polarized. Even, here's a good way of contrasting elite and sometimes it's called mass polarization, is when you look at laws regarding gun control, not in terms of banning guns, but in terms of, for example, having background checks. Well, the polarization in Congress is radical, but the polarization in the population isn't. You know, a large percentage of gun owners think, yeah, we ought to have more rational background checks.
I've seen this. I saw when Marjorie Taylor Greene came out on President's Day and said, we're so polarized, we got a national divorce because red and blue can't live together. There were a couple people saying, well, actually, we're not that polarized because here's this survey showing the majority of Americans want rational gun policy or better health care or this or that. Yet at the same time, January 6th, right? I mean, I could be wrong, but I doubt in 2018 you were going, oh, I expect in the next couple of years something equivalent to a coup is going to happen. That's significantly worse than anything you saw or imagined in 2018 , right?
Well, that's true.
Things getting worse a little bit, right? I mean,
in fact, well, at least the action of a minority are.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. And it's true that none of this would even have made a credible novel 20 years ago. If you're going to go, oh, okay, I'm going to write this novel about a coup and the overthrow of the United States government, and it's going to have this charismatic figure who was a businessman and then became a reality TV star. No, it just wouldn't be believable.
Right.
And yet that's what happened. So.
Yeah, they never would have bought a TV star being president. They never would have thought a coup would have happened. They never would have thought Brexit would have happened. They never would have thought that the housing market bubble could collapse. I mean, they never would have thought that terrorists could fly into the U.S. There's a lot of things where big experts got it really, really, really wrong.
That's
and it seems to be happening more and more in our time.
That may be true.
But I'm just saying, I don't remember growing up and it was like every couple of years there was some gigantic, massive failure of all the experts getting it totally wrong on their field. And yet we seem to be doing that every 2 to 3 years. Now, are the public polarized or is it just the elites? And is that what the surveys are showing?
I don't think it's an either or. I think both. I think both the elites and the normal people, there is some polarization. I think the elites may be encouraging that polarization through polarized media, and because it's to the advantage, maybe the gerrymandered advantage of those political elites.
If the people are polarized, how come they're coming together on certain surveys?
I think that's a wonderful sign. I don't know why they are. I think it's wonderful that they are. I think it may be because it would be wonderful if the high school slogan you gave us, that people are actually thinking for themselves. It'd be wonderful. And it would also be wonderful if they talk to each other. One of the analyses of why polarization has happened doesn't have to do with opinions so much as it has to do with social fracturing. And that's by Cass Sunstein, who's a sociologist who has this long-standing, and basically his theory is, well, here's one thing that differed from 30, 40 years ago and now, and it has to do with social groupings, where there were fraternal organizations like the Rotary Club and the Elks and various fraternal organizations which brought people of very different opinions and classes together at noon on Thursdays, and they would talk to each other. Well, that kind of contact has become decreasing, where we tend to choose to live close to people who are a whole lot like us and talk to people who are a whole lot like us. And there isn't something like a coming together at the Rotary Club where we listen to people who aren't like us. So as difficult as it may seem, one of the ways that this really could turn around is greater contact and greater listening. If people do realize, I mean, I think it'd be great if people read our study and said, oh, that means the guy on the other side isn't necessarily irrational. That
Right.
may mean that
Right.
what he sees is the total spread of his available evidence, his epistemically manageable available evidence, tilts him the other way.
Right. Okay. So I think what you're saying is, tell me if I'm getting this wrong. People are polarized. They do come together on surveys. Both are true. And part of the reason that we have that is that we might have people trying to come together mentally, but we're so geographically sorted now, like we haven't been in the past. You don't have these communities bringing everybody together. We've kind of segregated ourselves into hardcore liberal or conservative communities. I've heard about this, Bill Bishop's book, The Big Sort, and that might be explained why we have this dichotomy of definitely people are polarized, definitely the elites are polarized, but you still see people seeming to come together on general questions on surveys, on big issues. And maybe that explains it. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it might also be true. I would hope it might be true that people start to be more critical of the media they've chosen. I mean,
Right.
I would hope that at least some Fox viewers would think, oh, well, maybe a lot of this was economically driven as opposed to
Sure.
something else. And people on the other side to say, oh, is there something comparable over here? So
what chance do you see? Because I'm in California and I know a lot of liberals and I know a lot in New York. What chance do you see your average California Democrat liberal going, you know what? We were wrong on the Trump colluded with Russia thing for 4 years. We said that. The evidence comes out now. It's not true. He didn't collude and the election wasn't stolen. Wow, was I wrong? I shouldn't have said that he was not my president for 4 years. I spread misinformation. I caused division based upon non-facts. And I'm sorry, Republicans. I shouldn't have done that. Let's come together. What's the chance of your average California Democrat ever thinking that or saying that?
minimal. On the other hand,
Oh.
if the chance of just about anybody in conversation going, oh, I see, I was wrong, is fairly small. Even with academic discussions with my colleagues, that tends not to happen. But this is what happens, is we'll have a heated debate one day over some academic issue. They won't be saying, oh, I guess I was wrong. But somehow when we get together the next day, we're working on a groundwork where it's as if they had admitted it was wrong.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What is the chance that the Democrats don't admit that they were wrong, but start acting like, we should not say somebody is not the president when we don't really have our facts straight. Boy, we should not do this again. Some sort of culpability, some sort of attempt to say, you know how we told our entire side that Trump colluded with Russia and the election wasn't stolen for 4 years? Well, now we need a totally different messaging from what we did then. What chance is there that the Democratic Party goes, we're not admitting that we were wrong, but we're going to have a complete about face and repudiation of the way that we acted the last 4 years.
No, that's not going to happen. But
What?
that may also be an issue of the elites. That may be the political elite that is not going to say that kind of thing.
I haven't met anybody on the ground who's willing to say it. I know a ton of liberals, and I have told them about the Durham report, and I've also told them about the scientific study that said that all of Russia's influence amounted to no more than 1% of the vote being changed. And I'm like, hey, it's just me. You could admit you were wrong. We're friends. I need to look into those reports more personally. I'll get back to you after I read the whole 600-page report and I confirm that it's right. So you do that with everything you read. Oh, no, I typically just accept the headlines from my newspaper. But for this one, I'll look into it. And maybe a year from now, after I read 600 pages.
That's confirmation bias. And that's some of the irrational that, there's an old study by Lord, Ross, and Lepper, as I remember, that's exactly that kind of thing, where what they did was it's not a modeling study, it's a real people study, but it's in the lab where they divided people in terms of, well, are you a proponent of the death penalty or an opponent of the death penalty? Right. And then divided the two in half, gave them both the same evidence, some of which seemed to be support the death penalty, some seemed to be opposing the death penalty, and surprise, surprise, you got confirmation bias. Those people who came in thinking the death penalty was a good idea thought the study that supported the death penalty, well, that's a great study. But the one on the other side that seemed to show it wasn't such a good idea, oh, that's dubious. And in fact, when they included not only the study, but critiques of the study, oh, well, that destroyed that one. And yes, so of course that happens. And nothing magical is going to make people not try to save face and fail to admit they were wrong.
I'm just thinking we can't even have, as a friend, as a colleague, and I've known you for years, and it's just you and me, and we're in a closed door, closed room, no recording. You can just admit it to me, and they won't even do it. And so when I hear it's a problem with the elites, I'm like, I can't even get my close friends or family who know damn well that I know that they were wrong, that I know my information, and confronted to even admit it to me in a private one-on-one thing. I'm wondering how much can we say it's really the elites when it seems like the people don't want to hear it either.
Well, I think the thing to do is to go on to the next piece of information and hope that the conversation can have that kind of impact, even if it's not admitting you're wrong and about face.
Sure, that would be nice. I want to make sure to cover this chart.
Okay.
You sent it over. What are we looking at here? I want to make sure we cover this.
Well, we've been talking about polarization the whole time. But one of the things we found when we started to look at alternative models of polarization was the models weren't all talking about the same thing. They were trying to come up with plausible mechanisms as to why polarization happens, but they didn't mean the same thing by polarization, and their models had different effects. And it was true in the political science literature too. It was true in sociology too. It's still often true. When somebody's talking about polarization, it's not clear what they mean. So one of the studies we did was really just trying to clarify the different things that people might mean by polarization. And we came up with 9 and could have kept going that were logically independent. One of these things could happen and the other not happen. And they could be called polarization, but they're different phenomena. So here again, we have graphs. So these are some of the different things that people can mean. Here again, we have graphs where the bottom is opinions. You can think liberal on the left and conservative on the right, or any guilty or innocent or something. One thing people can mean by polarization is spread, meaning what are the extremes? How far apart are the very extremes? And in fact, I just picked up a book, Nolan McCarthy's Polarization, What Everyone Needs to Know. That seems to be what McCarthy means. Book? Yes, that seems to be what he means, because he talks about the extremes. And so one thing you could mean is just, oh, how far apart are the farthest aparts?
Okay.
That's spread. On the other hand, you might mean distinctness, meaning how much overlap is there between these two groups? And the more overlap, the less polarized. The less overlap, the more polarized. On the other hand, a very different kind of thing is what's here called solidarity, which is, okay, you've got the Republicans and the Democrats say, but how much are they concentrated around their mean? How little variance is there of the opinions on the sort of mean position of the group? How diverse are views among Republicans? How diverse are groups among Democrats? And the less diverse they are, like on the right, that looks like greater polarization. Now, of course, these things can go together. In fact, what we tend to see is both distinctness and the solidarity. If you look at the congressional record, is the groups have become farther apart and they've become more concentrated in their groups.
Right. I've heard that.
Size disparity, we tend to talk about polarization when you've got two groups about the same size. When one is a clear majority, we tend to say that's less polarized, even if the views are right at the spot that they would be otherwise. And then there's something that's totally different, which is, okay, what are your views on gun control, on abortion, on states' rights, and how much do these congeal? Well, the Attitude Association acts as if we've just got two issues, but the more they congeal, like on the right-hand side, that looks like it's not just that everybody in your group agrees on this one issue, it's that there's a whole handful of issues that come and go together, which has always been true of political parties, that often there is no logical reason why the position you take on gun control should move lockstep with the position you take on abortion. They do. So, and all of this is just what the distribution of opinions looks like. And we've already got 5 clear differences in polarization. And then there are all kinds of things like social fragmentation, where the views are held by demographically different groups or geographically separated groups. So that chart is just if you really want to study polarization, there are various things you could mean by that, and some of them may be more important than others.
Okay, so somewhat hard to tell if it's more polarized now from 2018. January 6th definitely was a jump up, but we'll say it's definitely more crystallized, concretized, hardcore. Okay, makes sense. Does it, I think I already asked you this, but does it get better on its own? Before you answer, when Marjorie Taylor Greene said that America needs a national divorce on President's Day because the red and blue can't get along anymore, there was a Utah Republican governor who said, Marjorie, you idiot, we don't need a national divorce. We just need marriage counseling. Does America to come back together on its own? Do you see any natural reasons short of like some big epiphany happening? And is marriage counseling even possible for a population of 200 to 300 million people who are as polarized as we have been for as long as we have been?
I can't give you any nice, optimistic things are going to get better.
What?
Sorry.
What?
As I've said, even in the formal studies, once it's there, it's hard to get rid of. And I'm not sure who you'd go to for the marriage counseling.
That's what I was wondering, because I studied this, and that's how we got started on this series. So when Marjorie Taylor Greene said that we need a national divorce, the reaction from the media, 30 different articles from the left and the right, all mainstream, was there's no national divorce because we have these surveys where people come together, like you and I were talking about. So therefore, there can't be political division, wherein you and I seem to conclude, yeah, you can still have political division even if you do have these surveys. The media came and said Surveys prove there's no division. See, Marjorie, you're wrong. That didn't seem to work. People kept talking about her. So you fast forward to the next month when they were trying to tell people there's no division, don't pay attention to her. Basically, don't look over here. Then they went to, okay, there's division, but it's not that bad and we could fix it pretty easy. And really all we need is marriage counseling. And then you had 30 different newspapers left and right. Even Liz Cheney, I think, bringing this up. Well, we just need marriage counseling. Not one person defined it. 30 different newspapers. Everybody picked up the talking point. Oh, idiot, we need marriage counseling. Not 1 out of 30 could define what the hell that looks like.
Yes, and who would it be? And who's going? It's like
Who?
who would you turn to that would not themselves be polarized?
Thank you. That was the question I asked them. Who would you turn to that is not themselves polarized? And I heard people go, well, Liz Cheney. And I go, I'm sorry, all the MAGA group hates her guts. So whether they should or not. So she's polarized. So then who? Oh, then I heard Tulsi Gabbard. And I go, the Democrats have painted her as a Russian spy. So pick another one. Bernie Sanders. The Democrats have trashed that man. Pick another one. And you just go, who is this? Who's this magical person that hasn't already, whether they did it intentionally or right or wrong, offended millions of other Americans and are going to be seen as a pariah? And how do you take this pariah figure who always got baggage and you're going to make him the savior to bring us all together? I'm like, it's not Obama. It's not Trump. Those guys are polarizing figures to other groups. You need somebody that brings everyone together. The best answer I've heard so far, and I'm not saying it's a good answer, it's just one I've heard, was Robert Kennedy, because he had a Democratic background and he's kind of saying some things conservatives don't see Democrats saying, so he's getting a little bit of their attention.
We'll see how that goes.
Well, he's already getting trashed by the Dems. He's already getting trashed by the mainline Democrats.
Yes.
They already got their own people. So I'm like, again, who are you going to get that's not upset some other major faction in the country?
Right.
Okay, we'll leave it there. 2 questions left for you. Do you have any questions for us? Was there something you wanted to cover and feel you didn't get to? Was there something you wanted to clarify? Did we say anything wrong during the interview? Is there anything we need to go over again, or you felt I wanted to cover?
No, I think this has been a good discussion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations? I hope you feel this was a fair discussion. Do you know anybody who is on the left, on the right? We don't care what their opinion is, just they can talk intelligently, form complete sentences. Do you know anybody who might be willing to be part of this conversation?
Yes. She holds views that she admits people aren't going to want, but she's also a formal modeler. She's done some wonderful formal modeling on polarization and on influence, particularly industrial influence. And that's Kaylin O'Connor, who's at the University of California, Irvine. And has done a book with James Weatherall, who I don't know as well, but he might work too, called The Misinformation Age.
Thank you so much. Okay.
I think highly of her work, and she knows perfectly well that I'm going to disagree with her recommendation.
I really appreciate that. I will email a copy of the interview. Last question for you. This question we always ask everybody. I want you to picture yourself for a second. You're not you. You're not me. You're a third person. You don't even know this person. They're watching this video. They've listened to a lot. They've learned a lot, but there was a lot of material, a lot of new concepts for them to get. 5 days from now, they're saying to themselves, I watched this great interview. I don't remember all of it, but there was this one thing that the professor said at the end, and I just can't get it out of my head. What is that one thing you want an average American to not be able to stop thinking about 5 days from now?
The dynamics of polarization formation can happen even with purely rational individuals talking to each other and with the same background information.
Okay. That's very succinct.
I guess another way to do it is polarization does not equal irrationality.
Yeah. We could print that on a shirt.
Yeah.
And people go, what? I thought it did. And you go, well, actually, it's the human mind trying to make sense of its universe.
Right.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for coming out, Professor. I will email you a copy of the interview in a few hours. I really appreciate it. And I want to say thank you for coming out. I appreciate it a bunch.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.